absolutely beautiful day here in Malibu, California. I'm going to try to paint some reflections today. The tide is low, so there are a lot of beautiful reflections on the wet sand. I'm going to try to keep this painting loose and spontaneous, and I may try to push the color a bit as well. But the main focus is to create convincing reflections on the wet sand. I'm painting on a 16 by 20 inch panel today. I'm going to tone the panel today with burnt sienna. It's been a while since I've done this, but I'm thinking of having some individual brush strokes with gaps in between the strokes. So having the this sort of warm orange color showing through could be nice, but I do want to keep the tone very, very light. So I'll be wiping this down with a rag or paper towel. Most of the time I use a rag because I've got pumice in my gesso and it'll just shred the paper towel. It actually kind of shreds my brushes too. All right, so I think that looks pretty good. All right, so I'm gonna set the horizon line at about the top third. This is a fairly simple composition. There's, land kind of coming out like this, and then water. And in here are the reflections in this area right here, which tend to be vertical brush strokes, but I do want to build this painting up using individual strokes. So I'm not sure how that's going to work. So it'll be a fun experiment. So I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but I do like the arrangement of the simple shapes. So now I'm getting a little more specific, working from the broad to the specific. And there's some white buildings over to the right here that are going to be one of the key features of the reflections. I've done this scene in watercolor and I was happy with the way it turned out, but I've tried it in oils multiple times and I haven't really been satisfied, so it'll be interesting to see how this works out. Sometimes doing the watercolor really helps me get some ideas about what I'd like to do with oil. All right, so there's going to be some white water out along the rocks here, and then the waves sort of come in at an angle like this, and then there's a bit of water running over the sand here, so I'll include some ripples. There's also a rock in the sand right here, which sort of creates some interesting patterns in the wet sand, so I think I'll try to include that. I can always eliminate it if I want. Even though I'm going to try to finish off the painting using some simple strokes, I'm still going to scrub in the basic shapes using a large brush, and I do want to capture these shapes quickly because the shapes in the wet sand are changing pretty quickly. So I'm just going to get these patterns in, and then I'll just stick with whatever the pattern is right now. I'll kind of stick with that. All right, added some burnt sienna to the mixture to darken it a little bit. The water is a bit darker than the sky reflections. And one of the tricks I use with watercolor is to use the darks to carve out the lights. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. Just working quickly and spontaneously, and then looking for patterns in the white water that look appealing and then building upon those. All right, for my dark mixture, I've got ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. And I like this mixture because it's transparent, but it's also a nice color. It's kind of a purple color. And even though sometimes when I'm outside it seems extreme, it always looks really nice when I get it indoors. It's not an overwhelming purple. And like I said, because it's transparent, it's just really nice for shadows. It's still important to me to establish interesting shapes before building this painting up with, individual strokes. Step one is to have a nice abstract pattern to work with. And then once I'm happy with that, then I can start having fun with individual strokes and just make sure not to break up the design. All right, there's some dark shapes up here as well. All right, for my sky, I'm using titanium white and some phthalo blue. And there are variations in the sky, but I'm gonna start with this color. My brush is a little bit dirty, but that's all right. I'm trying not to cover up all of the warm patches from the tone. I just want to establish the general shapes to see if I like the arrangement. Okay, I feel like I want this wet sand to kind of come out like this maybe, so it's not just this perfect straight line or diagonal line going like this. All right, so now I'm going to put in the sand, but the first thing I'm going to do is paint in the transition where the sand goes from dry to wet. So right along the reflective area here, it's kind of a darker color. All right, and the sand around this rock is sort of dry, and that's why I wanted to include this, because it will break up this area of blue. Just maybe make it a little more interesting looking. All right, the dry sand is a little warmer in temperature, and I want to make sure that I keep the value of the sand dark enough that it allows the white water to stand out, because the white water is the lightest value in the painting. Okay, I want to paint in some of the shadow shapes for the buildings, and I want to keep this area right in here the brightest, even though the buildings go right off the edge. I think I want to have the light focused right around in this area here, and just squinting at the scene to simplify. All right, so I'm painting in the dark portion of the reflections here, and I'm using vertical strokes, and I am paying attention to what's above the reflections. All right, putting in the light portions here. Actually, there's some light over here as well. And I'll come back over with the blue, but I just want to establish these, the lighter portions of the reflections early on. All right, so reestablishing some of the sky reflections. Now, I feel like I'm getting a fairly decent, reflection here, but as I mentioned, I want to play around with thicker paint and more, decisive strokes as opposed to this scrubby approach, just for fun. So I may lose it, but that's all right. All right, there's some bushes and trees out here on the point, so I'm going to add those in. And they're mostly dark in value. I will be adding some lighter, warmer bits onto these plants and trees, but for now, just want to establish sort of a dark green. All right, there are a couple rocks in the water here, and I think I'm going to add these just to create some interest along this shoreline. And there's a few rocks out here. I don't want this to be a straight line. All right, so the rocks along the shoreline and the cliffs are kind of the same color. In reality, they're kind of gray, but I'm warming them up. I want to try to get some red into them. Similar color here out on the point. And there are actually some trees right here, a few more right here. And then a house like that. And I just want the silhouettes of the houses. I want them just to be suggested, no detail. Okay, so here I've got titanium white and yellow ochre. Still just squinting, looking for those light spots. Okay, for the waves, I've got ultramarine blue and titanium white. All Probably painting in the dark portions of this rock here. And maybe making it a little bigger than it is in real life. I'm thinking also adding maybe a small one right here. Okay, and now the light portion on top. And the light portion here as well. Alright, so I think I'm going to stop here. As I mentioned, I was trying to get convincing reflections on the wet sand. I went in with thicker paint in the reflections, but I had to rework it because it just was not reading as reflections anymore. So thinner paint in the reflections, and I used thicker paint for the rest of the painting, like for example on the buildings and the water. Alright, well, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. It's the Patreon support that helps keep me making these videos. It's much appreciated, so check it out. Other than that, stay creative. I'll see you guys in the next video.